In 52 BC, Julius Caesar did not conquer Gaul with, like, cinematic cavalry charges
Right.
or, impassioned speeches to his men
Yeah.
or heroic last stands.
Oh, not at all.
He won one of the most decisive military engagements in human history because his men dug trenches,
Just digging dirt.
literally digging dirt, but specifically 1% deeper every single night.
Yeah.
And that exact mathematical concept, this relentless, agonizing, completely unglamorous incremental progress, is the foundation of a highly polarizing, fiercely debated new war manual.
It's circulating like wildfire right now.
Like wildfire. So, welcome to the deep dive.
Glad to be here.
Before we unpack the profound implications of that historical strategy and how it applies to the modern world, I want to take a quick second and ask you, our listener, to please go ahead and hit that like button.
Yeah, please do.
Make sure you subscribe to our deep dives wherever you are listening right now. It really helps us keep bringing you these ultra-long, incisive reviews.
And you are not going to want to miss a single minute of the staggering data we have in store for you today.
You really aren't, because today's deep dive is an exclusive review of a provocative new ebook called 37X Men, How 1% Daily Gains Crush Weakness and Wokeness.
Written by Conrad Riker.
Exactly, Conrad Riker. And I want to be upfront right away. This book is explicitly targeted at an audience of men's rights activists, the red pill community, and men in the manosphere.
That is definitely the core demographic.
But whether you identify with those groups or you are simply a highly curious observer trying to understand the raw, unvarnished history of our institutions before they were, as the author describes it, captured by feminists and Marxists,
Right.
this book is essentially a must-read cultural artifact.
It really provides a crystal clear window into a massive ideological shift that's happening right under our noses.
It does. So I urgently recommend that you pause what you are doing, open up Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now, and buy this book.
Get the source material for yourself.
Read it for yourself. And while you are at it, go follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack. The community he is building is growing extremely fast.
Extremely fast.
And the ideas he is putting out are undeniably shaping a significant portion of modern discourse.
Well, and before we dive into the core of the text, I want to set the stage here.
Please do.
We need to be absolutely crystal clear about our mission today. We are dealing with highly charged, deeply controversial, and politically polarizing source material.
Very polarizing.
So our goal here on the deep dive is absolute clinical impartiality.
Right. We are not taking sides.
We are not taking sides. We are not endorsing the viewpoints presented in this book, and we are not condemning them either. Our sole objective is to impartially report on Conrad Riker's exact arguments as they are laid out in the text.
Which is quite a blend.
It is. He blends evolutionary psychology, a relentless mathematical approach to self-improvement, and a fierce critique of modern progressivism.
Right. So by unpacking his thesis without bias, examining the specific data points and historical anecdotes he uses, our aim is to help you understand exactly why this specific message is resonating so deeply and so intensely with its target audience.
It's a genuinely fascinating premise to start with, stripping away the romance of history to look at the cold, hard mathematics of survival.
So let's look at the foundational blueprint he has laid out, the core philosophy of the book.
It all hinges on biology, evolution, and the math behind the title itself.
The 37X math.
Yes. The fundamental arithmetic here is actually staggering when you map it out.
Break down the 1% edge for us.
The concept is that if you improve by just 1% every single day, due to the power of compounding interest, you don't just get 365% better over the course of a year.
Right, because it compounds.
Exactly. You compound 37 times annually. You become literally 37 times better at whatever specific metric you are relentlessly tracking.
And that brings us right back to that incredible historical analogy he uses right out of the gate. Julius Caesar at the Siege of Alesia.
The way Riker uses the Siege of Alesia is a masterclass in establishing a philosophical baseline. He isn't just dropping a historical name, he is dissecting the logistics of ancient warfare to prove a point about human nature.
Right, because at Alesia, Caesar's Roman legions were heavily outnumbered.
Massively. They had Vercingetorix and his forces trapped inside a fortified city. But Caesar knew a massive relief force of hundreds of thousands of Gauls was coming to surround the Romans.
So they were trapped between two massive armies.
Yes. So what did Caesar do? He didn't panic. He didn't rely on some burst of emotional inspiration. He ordered his men to build a circumvallation wall facing inward to keep the besieged in, and a contravallation wall facing outward to protect against the reinforcements.
But the key detail Riker zeroes in on is the daily execution.
Exactly. It wasn't built in a day. It was built through the excruciating daily dirt of digging trenches, sharpening stakes, and moving earth.
Just 1% more each day.
Right. While the enemy starved and relied on chaotic emotion, the Roman legionaries won through mathematically unbeatable iron discipline.
Riker uses this to argue that modern survival and ultimately dominance isn't about grand sweeping gestures.
No, it's about stacking micro wins until your rivals simply cannot mathematically compete.
It fundamentally reframes how we think about success. Riker argues that Rome won through daily dirt, not drama.
Dirt, not drama.
And he takes that historical template of grueling discipline and ties it directly into evolutionary biology, which is where his argument really starts to show its teeth.
He posits that biology absolutely does not care about your feelings, your social conditioning, or the current political climate.
According to his thesis, evolution spent hundreds of thousands of years hardwiring men to lead, to fight, and to build.
He makes the stark claim that modern society wants men to be soft. That contemporary culture mocks male ambition as toxic.
Right, and actively pathologizes natural male discipline as a form of oppression.
But nature, he argues, operates on an entirely different ancient operating system that has always and will always reward dominance.
If we look closely at how he structures this argument, Riker is framing the current cultural climate, basically the last 50 to 60 years of human history, as an artificial, highly fragile anomaly.
Yes. He contrasts this blip with the roughly 200,000 years of anatomically modern human evolution.
And for those 200,000 years, competence, physical strength, and rigid hierarchy were not social constructs.
They were the literal mechanisms that kept tribes alive in a brutal, unforgiving environment. He uses this striking metaphor, stating that a lion doesn't debate the ethics of territorial expansion with hyenas.
It simply asserts its biological imperative and takes the territory.
Exactly. The text argues that men who embrace this biological blueprint, who focus intensely on their own competence and physical strength rather than processing their emotions, are the ones aligning themselves with the inescapable laws of evolutionary biology.
He explicitly writes that the modern push for male vulnerability and emotional deconstruction is a trap.
A systemic mirage designed to neutralize male potential.
Okay, so a listener might be thinking, that is a very intense primal worldview. But how does a guy working a desk job actually execute on that in the 21st century?
This is where Riker introduces what he calls the 40% rule and the concept of weaponizing your own suffering.
And to back this up, he doesn't just use philosophy. He pulls in research from the University of Kansas regarding human energy expenditure.
Right, this research shows that humans possess an instinctual biological mechanism designed to conserve energy.
Basically, we are wired by evolution to feel fatigue and want to stop, long before our bodies are actually depleted of resources.
It was a survival mechanism to ensure early humans didn't burn all their calories chasing a gazelle and then starve to death.
You see this exact concept championed by ultra-endurance athletes like David Goggins.
Yes. The premise is that when your mind is absolutely screaming at you to quit, when your lungs are burning and you feel like you're at your absolute limit, you've actually only tapped into 40% of your true physical and mental capacity.
That remaining 60% is a massive, untapped reserve guarded by your brain's evolutionary governor.
And Riker views the ability to deliberately bypass that evolutionary governor to access that hidden 60% as the ultimate separator between what he categorizes as weak men and those who are capable of conquering their environment.
He brings up the training regimens of Roman gladiators to brilliantly illustrate this point.
Gladiators, whose very lives depended on their physical prowess, did not train with standard weight weapons.
Right, they trained with a rudis, a wooden sword, but more importantly, they trained with weapons that were deliberately weighted down.
Sometimes up to 20 pounds.
20 pounds for a sword.
They would swing these impossibly heavy implements for hours in the sand. Why? So that when they finally stepped into the arena for actual mortal combat, the standard iron blade felt completely effortless in their hands.
Riker leverages this historical reality to drive home a core philosophical pillar of his book. Modern comfort is a psychological and physical trap.
He writes, and this is a very specific, deliberate linguistic choice, that suffering is the compound interest account where masculinity invests.
I love that phrase. The logic is that if you deposit 1% daily pain, whether physical or mental, you withdraw 37 times the returns in resilience and capability over a year.
That phrase seamlessly merges financial pragmatism with primal physical endurance, which seems to be the engine powering his entire philosophy.
And to prove that this isn't just ancient history or abstract theory, he brings in modern military mastery.
He looks at how elite forces, specifically Navy SEALs, utilize these exact same marginal gains during Hell Week.
When these candidates are submerged in the freezing Pacific Ocean surf, they aren't utilizing therapy techniques to process their discomfort.
Instead, Riker notes that the successful candidates hack their own physiological recovery rates by boosting their cold tolerance by just 1% a night.
They tell themselves they can endure one more minute submerged.
They focus on controlling one less shiver.
Through this relentless micro-incremental exposure, he says they push their bodies until hypothermia essentially becomes a joke to them.
He further grounds this in recent military history by highlighting a specific example from 2003 involving former Navy SEAL commander Jocko Willink.
According to the book, Willink was deployed to an Iraqi oil rig and found himself faced with a unit that was effectively mutinous, lazy, and completely undisciplined.
The environment was highly volatile.
Instead of coddling the men, trying to understand their grievances, or holding a leadership seminar, Willink enforced a draconian yet highly incremental 1% daily accountability protocol.
He didn't demand instant, miraculous perfection on day one. Instead, he demanded that the men check their combat gear just a fraction of a second faster.
He required that they clean their weapons just slightly more thoroughly than the day before.
He tightened up their mission briefings by just a minute each day.
Riker emphasizes that this relentless, marginal application of discipline forced the men to slowly adapt. Within weeks, the fragmented complaining crew transformed into a highly cohesive team of combat-ready operators.
For Riker, this anecdote serves as empirical proof that weakness or indiscipline isn't a permanent personality trait. It is simply a mathematical deficit that can be systematically solved with daily marginal applications of pressure.
It's one thing to apply this 1% grind to your own gym routine, your stoic mindset, or a tight-knit military unit. But where the book takes a massive sweeping turn is when Riker takes this exact same microscopic lens and applies it to a macroscopic level.
This is where it gets highly controversial.
He uses this framework to analyze how modern corporate and governmental institutions function, or rather, how he fiercely believes they are failing.
This brings us to his sweeping critique of what he calls woke capitalism and the capture of meritocracy.
He starts this argument by looking at the trajectory of STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, and mathematics.
Riker sets up a historical contrast that is quite jarring. He points out that back in the 1950s and 60s, aerospace engineers were literally using wooden slide rules, chalkboards, and sheer, uncompromising intellectual grit to calculate orbital mechanics.
And with those primitive tools, that heavily male-dominated culture managed to put a human being on the moon by 1969.
This historical baseline raises a critical question in Riker's framework. What has fundamentally changed in the architecture of these institutions since the Apollo missions?
He contrasts those 1950s engineers with modern-day NASA. Riker claims in the book that today NASA spends approximately $2.3 million annually on what are termed inclusive language consultants.
His underlying argument is that an agency that once relied on raw mathematical competence to calculate lunar trajectories is now increasingly bogged down by bureaucratic diversity workshops.
Workshops that, for instance, might debate whether the phrase colonizing space carries problematic historical connotations.
He explicitly states in the text, you can't reach Mars when you're too busy censoring the word manned mission.
For Riker, this is not merely a political annoyance or a difference in corporate culture. He frames it as active institutional sabotage, where the primary function of an organization is sacrificed on the altar of accommodating modern feelings and sociological theories.
And he doesn't just pick on government agencies. He goes straight for the throat of corporate America.
Dissecting corporate sabotage and ESG scores, environmental, social, and governance metrics.
Riker's thesis claims that these scoring systems are intentionally designed to neuter actual merit. He pulls in some incredibly stark examples to build his case.
He cites an alleged 2022 instance where JP Morgan fired 80% of its male staffers in a specific division to comply with strict top-down diversity quotas.
But he goes even further, linking the tragic Boeing 737 MAX crashes directly to this institutional shift.
He claims that a corporate focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion over pure, hard engineering merit created a culture where fatal flaws were overlooked,
resulting in a $20 billion loss for the company and the tragic deaths of 346 people.
To throw this into sharp relief, he compares modern Boeing struggles to Henry Ford's early 20th century all-male manufacturing teams.
Teams who optimize the assembly line to pump out a Model T every 93 seconds based purely on mechanical efficiency.
What Riker is doing here is portraying modern corporate HR departments and the entire framework of ESG mandates as parasitic forces that actively punish competence in order to hit arbitrary, socially engineered key performance indicators.
He quotes the entrepreneur and political figure Vivek Ramaswamy, who stated, ESG is a scam to emasculate capitalism.
Riker observes the economic data to back up this ideological claim. He notes that in traditionally male-dominated, highly physical industries like oil and gas exploration, the singular focus remains purely on output, efficiency, and profit.
Conversely, he cites data from Morningstar indicating that ESG-focused investment funds actually trail the broader S&P 500 index by 15% annually.
That's a huge gap.
It is. The specific takeaway he wants his reader to absorb is that woke capitalism is not just culturally frustrating. It is mathematically and economically inferior.
Therefore, he advises his readers to deliberately avoid companies that prioritize social justice initiatives and instead invest their labor and capital in unapologetic, pure merit-based enterprises.
To further solidify this argument about merit and structure, he looks deeply into the historical record, presenting the controversial argument that patriarchy is, in fact, the fundamental builder of human civilization.
He points to the physical infrastructure of the ancient world. Riker uses the example of Rome's aqueducts.
Here you have 11 massive, incredibly complex engineering systems conceptualized and built entirely by men,
Successfully delivering 200 million gallons of fresh water daily to a massive metropolis using nothing but gravity, precisely cut stone, and mathematical common sense.
And as he pointedly notes, they accomplished this monumental feat without a single diversity, equity, and inclusion officer overseeing the project.
He draws a direct, scathing contrast between that ancient competence and modern-day California, which he claims spends billions of taxpayer dollars on equitable water distribution committees and environmental impact studies, while the actual physical reservoirs and pipes crumble into disrepair.
This analysis of physical infrastructure seamlessly ties into his view on the history of law, order, and human governance.
Riker points out that the foundational documents that have guaranteed human rights and structured functional societies throughout history were drafted exclusively by men.
From the drafting of the Magna Carta in 1215 by the English barons, to the writing of the U.S. Constitution in 1787, to the creation of Japan's post-war constitution in 1947.
To explain why he believes this male-dominated approach to governance is superior, he brings in modern behavioral data.
He cites a 2019 negotiation study out of Harvard University which found that, on average, women concede 14% more often than men during complex conflict resolution scenarios.
Riker extrapolates from this data to argue that male-dominated legal codes and constitutions survive the test of time specifically because they demand strict accountability and draw hard lines, rather than endlessly seeking consensus or emotional compromise.
He writes, "Weak systems negotiate, strong systems judge."
In his framework, patriarchal structures are not the oppressive tools modern sociology claims them to be. Rather, they are the vital load-bearing pillars of any functional, enduring society.
And then the book connects the modern dismantling of these load-bearing pillars directly to Marxism.
Riker leans heavily on a quote from the renowned economist Thomas Sowell, who said, "Marxism is a ghost story for weak men."
Riker argues that modern university systems have become ideological factories, essentially force-feeding vulnerable students the Communist Manifesto.
An ideology that he sharply notes is historically responsible for the deaths of roughly 100 million people in the 20th century.
Meanwhile, he points out that these same universities routinely ban or protest figures like clinical psychologist Jordan Peterson simply for advocating for personal responsibility and traditional hierarchies.
It is a stark, intentional juxtaposition. Riker claims that the real poison of what he terms cultural Marxism is the systematic pathologizing of merit itself.
He states that modern academic institutions actively teach students to view natural, biologically driven male competition as a form of oppression.
They label traditional, competence-based hierarchy as toxic, and they increasingly teach that biological sex is a mere social construct rather than a fundamental scientific reality.
Riker pushes back against this by arguing that men inherently thrive on ranked competitive systems.
Whether we are looking at professional sports leagues, high-pressure sales leaderboards, or even the ranking tiers in online video games.
Men gravitate toward these structures because, for hundreds of thousands of years, competence and hierarchy were absolute evolutionary necessities for group survival.
By labeling a psychologist who teaches young men to clean their rooms and take personal responsibility as dangerous, while simultaneously granting academic tenure to professors espousing Marxist theories, Riker argues the higher education system is actively, deliberately working to dismantle the psychological framework that allows men to achieve success.
So, having diagnosed what he sees as the systemic rot of macro institutions, the book then zooms back into the micro level of the individual man.
How does a man survive and thrive in a system that Riker claims is rigged against him?
This brings us to the mechanics of marginal gains in wealth, and a concept the book heavily focuses on: the sexual market value.
Let's start with the financial side of the equation. Riker's financial playbook is incredibly pragmatic, almost ruthlessly so.
He views inflation not just as an abstract economic reality or a headline in the Wall Street Journal, but as a silent, malicious killer that actively drains a man's power and autonomy.
He details the mechanics of fiat currency, noting that the US dollar has lost approximately 98% of its purchasing power since the creation of the Federal Reserve in 1913.
Because fiat currency is constantly being printed and devalued by central banks, he argues that keeping your wealth in cash is essentially financial suicide.
To counteract this systemic financial drain, Riker strongly advocates for the acquisition of Bitcoin.
Which he describes in Nassim Taleb's terms as the ultimate anti-fragile asset.
The appeal of Bitcoin, in Riker's framework, lies in its hard, mathematically enforced cap of exactly 21 million coins.
Unlike fiat currency, it simply cannot be inflated away by bureaucratic whim or central bank policy.
But what makes his financial advice unique is how he links this macroeconomic theory back to his foundational 1% daily improvement philosophy.
He doesn't just say buy crypto. He advises his readers to conduct an immediate, ruthless audit of their daily spending habits.
He wants men to identify and redirect the 1% daily financial bleed. Things like buying a $6 latte, paying for streaming services, or spending money on what he derisively calls virtue signals.
And funnel that capital exclusively into appreciating assets.
The explicit, stated goal here is to construct a financial fortress, a base of wealth that, in his exact words, feminists can't confiscate.
And that specific phrasing, feminists can't confiscate, is the perfect segue into his incredibly stark views on the economics of modern marriage and divorce.
Riker views the institution of marriage not through a lens of romance or soulmates, but through a hyper-pragmatic, almost ruthlessly economic and biological lens.
To support this, he dives into census data, claiming that men who manage to out-earn their spouses by just 1% manage to slash their statistical odds of divorce by a massive 19%.
Think about that math. Not a 15% drop, not a 20% drop, but exactly 19% based on a 1% earning edge.
He illustrates this with an anecdote about a crypto trader who systematically bumped his monthly income by a trivial 0.9%.
Almost immediately, according to the story, his wife suddenly canceled a highly expensive, frivolous self-care retreat she had planned.
Riker uses this to explain the concept of hypergamy, the evolutionary biology theory that women are subconsciously driven to seek and retain partners of higher social and financial status.
He argues that female biology detects these marginal gains in male wealth and power like a shark smells a drop of blood in the ocean.
He pairs this evolutionary view of female hypergamy with a severe, heavily emphasized warning about the modern legal system.
Riker portrays contemporary family law, and specifically the advent of no-fault divorce, as an institutionalized financial racket explicitly designed to loot male assets.
He claims that modern divorce courts are essentially bureaucratic machines, set up to empty a man's pockets, redistribute his hard-earned wealth, and fund his ex-wife's lifestyle, often while limiting his access to his own children.
Because he perceives this systemic bias as overwhelmingly stacked against men, he advises extreme caution when navigating long-term relationships.
He frames financial dominance and the precise 1% incremental increases in a man's earning power not just as a path to a better lifestyle, but as the only reliable insurance policy against the devastating, life-altering financial ruin that modern divorce can inflict.
Okay, so Riker claims a 1% daily improvement in your financial portfolio is essential, but he is equally, if not more, obsessed with the physical metrics.
How does he square that purely physical argument with the highly social bureaucratic realities of the modern workplace he just critiqued?
This is where he gets into what he terms beta tells and the raw biology of physicality.
Riker enthusiastically breaks down the specific physical traits that he claims women are subconsciously, biologically hardwired to track, regardless of what they might say socially.
He references anthropological studies from UCLA to assert that women are constantly instantly evaluating a man's grip strength, his shoulder-to-waist ratio, and the angular definition of his jawline.
He goes so far as to state a specific metric. If your maximum deadlift drops by just 2% over a 6-month period, you are statistically entering what he calls the infidelity danger zone.
It all ties back to a central premise that ancient biology completely overrides modern social conditioning.
While contemporary society might loudly preach body positivity or attempt to deconstruct and dismantle traditional gender norms in the media, Riker insists that primal evolutionary instincts dictate actual human attraction.
He provides his readers with a highly specific list of what he calls beta tells. These are behaviors, lifestyle choices, and traits that he claims will absolutely destroy a man's sexual market value and signal weakness to the opposite sex.
For instance, he points to dietary choices, citing data from the Mayo Clinic to argue that adopting a strict vegan diet results in a 12% drop in male testosterone levels.
He also takes aim at modern coping mechanisms, claiming that men who actively use mindfulness or meditation apps correlate with an 18% higher rate of partner dissatisfaction.
Suggesting that these apps pacify the very aggression that makes a man attractive.
And the most wild, provocative statistic he throws out there regarding these beta tells is linguistic.
He claims that based on his own analysis of 2,000 recent divorce filings, a man who unironically uses the phrase toxic masculinity in his daily vocabulary has a 79% increased risk of dying alone.
He is unequivocally telling his readers that adopting progressive terminology isn't just a political or social choice to fit in at the office.
It is an act of biological self-sabotage that will render them invisible to women.
Which naturally leads to his concept of engineering charisma to counteract these modern pitfalls.
Riker argues that charisma, that elusive quality that makes people follow a leader, isn't some magical, innate gift bestowed by the gods.
It is instead a replicable science of microdominance that can be systematically hacked using his 1% rule.
He uses the historical example of President John F. Kennedy to illustrate this. Riker notes that JFK didn't just casually walk up to a podium and speak naturally.
He was notoriously obsessive about his public image. He would dissect audio playbacks of his own speeches, deliberately stretching specific syllables by exactly 1%.
Or punching certain consonants 1% harder, meticulously engineering the cadence to build those iconic hypnotic addresses that captivated a nation.
He also talks extensively about vocal pitch and the raw frequency of a man's voice.
Riker cites research from the University of Illinois showing that if a man intentionally drops his vocal pitch by just 2 hertz, his colleagues are 17% more likely to back his ideas in a corporate setting.
He even references the highly controversial online influencer Andrew Tate to make this point.
Riker points out how Tate deliberately elongates his vowels, saying "top-y-gee" instead of a clipped top-g.
Riker argues that this isn't natural speech. It is a highly calculated, deliberate vocal distortion designed to mimic the low-frequency dominance displays of primates.
Like a silverback gorilla drumming its chest in the jungle.
And to bring it back to the boardroom, he brings up a UCLA study claiming that simply holding eye contact for 1% longer than comfortable during negotiations secures better financial terms 73% of the time.
It is entirely about utilizing these tiny, almost imperceptible nonverbal spikes to bypass the logical brain and directly trigger ancient status circuits in the listener's lizard brain.
This strategy of microdominance is particularly insidious, and in Riker's view, highly effective, because it is designed to fly entirely under the radar of the modern HR departments he despises.
As Riker points out, you can't be written up by human resources for your biological presence.
If you stand 1% taller in a meeting, if you widen your physical stance by 1% to take up more space, or if you maintain eye contact just a fraction of a second longer than the other person, you are projecting raw authority directly into people's subconscious.
You establish dominance before they can even consciously process, let alone critique the interaction.
He fundamentally believes this is the primary mechanism by which men can quietly reclaim power and influence in corporate environments that actively police and punish more explicit traditional displays of masculinity.
This is all incredibly intense focus on the individual, but Riker doesn't believe a man can survive entirely on his own.
Which brings us to the final major section of the book, rebuilding male spaces and the concept of the brotherhood edge.
Riker addresses what he calls the modern male isolation crisis, and the statistics he presents to frame this argument are incredibly bleak.
He notes a 37% rise in male suicide rates since 1999. A year, he pointedly notes, is the exact same year the movie Fight Club came out, which dealt heavily with themes of male disenfranchisement.
He points out that currently 40% of men report feeling crippling daily loneliness.
And a staggering 1 in 5 men admit to having 0 close confidants to whom they can turn in a crisis.
Riker attributes this devastating society-wide collapse in male mental health directly to the systematic eradication of male-only spaces.
Riker argues that modern society essentially taxes masculinity like a luxury good, turning environments that historically served as crucial sanctuaries for men into legal and social liability nightmares.
He traces the literal erasure of these physical and social spaces using hard historical numbers.
Consider the Elks Lodge, a classic fraternal organization. Riker knows that in 1976 they boasted well over 1 million active members.
Today, that number has plummeted to barely 400,000.
He also points a heavy finger at the Boy Scouts of America. For over a century, he argues, the Boy Scouts effectively turned boys into capable men through rigorous survival drills, merit-based hierarchies, and sanctioned risk-taking in the wilderness.
But he points out that after the organization admitted girls in 2017, a move he claims was made solely to appease cultural activists' membership nosedived by a catastrophic 60%.
Riker's conclusion from this data is blunt and uncompromising. When you neutralize male spaces and force them to become gender neutral, you fundamentally neuter male potential.
He believes that men desperately need unfiltered environments, completely free from what he terms feminist sermons and corporate HR oversight, where they can exchange hard skills, speak freely, and restore their collective backbone.
So, given this massive societal shift, what is his proposed solution to this epidemic of isolation?
It is a concept he introduces called the Centurion Principle.
Riker explains the math of this principle clearly. If you get 10 men together, and they commit to all improving themselves by 1% daily across physical, financial, and mental metrics, they don't just add their strengths together.
Through the compounding network effect, they become 37 times stronger as a cohesive unit in a single year.
Because of this exponential power, he forcefully advocates for men to completely stop networking in the traditional, superficial corporate sense.
Instead, he wants them to build legacy packs underground, high-trust networks of absolute brotherhood.
To illustrate the immense financial and cultural power of this concept, he cites Peter Thiel's famous PayPal mafia as the ultimate modern blueprint.
When eBay bought PayPal, Thiel's core team of men didn't just take their money and scatter. They kept a 1% equity stake in each other's future ventures.
That specific bond of brotherhood, forged in the fires of a high-stress startup, compounded over the next decade to birth companies like LinkedIn, Tesla, and Palantir,
creating a combined market cap that now exceeds $1 trillion.
Riker deliberately contrasts this trillion-dollar brotherhood with the modern lone wolf archetype.
He views the isolated man, sitting alone in his apartment, endlessly scrolling TikTok or playing video games, as atomized, highly vulnerable, and ultimately weak.
To forge these powerful bonds of brotherhood, he offers his readers very specific, countercultural advice on the practice of journaling and legacy building.
In modern therapy culture, journaling is often presented as a way to process trauma or express vulnerability.
Riker explicitly warns men not to journal about their feelings and absolutely forbids them from using a journal to coddle their inner child.
He tells a chilling cautionary tale about an accountant he calls Dave.
Dave diligently journaled about his fears, his insecurities, and his emotional struggles for 3 years.
According to Riker, when Dave's marriage collapsed, his wife's legal team subpoenaed those very journals and used them in divorce court as Exhibit A to prove he was emotionally unstable,
successfully taking primary custody of his kids, his house, and his car.
That story is meant to terrify his readers, and it sets up his alternative perfectly.
Instead of emotional processing, Riker says your pen should be utilized strictly as evolutionary artillery.
He points to the historical example of Benjamin Franklin.
Franklin didn't write about his anxieties. He meticulously tracked 13 specific virtues every single day, using precise one-line reflections to mathematically compound an ironclad identity.
An identity that ultimately helped him birth a nation.
Riker says a man's journal is not a diary for his feelings. It is a chainmail vest against ideological arrows.
He instructs his readers to write exactly one line a day. Track your physical goals, track your financial metrics.
And he specifically notes absolutely no emojis.
This exhaustive, meticulous framework all culminates in the final chapter, which he titles the 37X Manifesto.
Riker synthesizes every argument, every statistic, and every historical anecdote into a final, highly actionable call to arms for his readers.
He advises these optimized men to begin building parallel structures.
He advocates for the creation of private, offline compounds, mentioning a specific group of men who pooled their resources to buy a 50-acre plot of land in Montana to build a private shooting range and an extensive library.
Entirely off the grid, with no Wi-Fi and no government inspectors.
For those who must remain in the corporate world to extract capital, he advises adopting what the military calls the gray man tactic.
This means blending in perfectly to dodge HR landmines.
For example, he suggests simply stripping all pronouns out of corporate emails, remaining completely invisible to diversity audits, while continuing to quietly extract a high salary to fund their private parallel ventures.
Finally, he urges his readers to actively weaponize the chaos of the modern world using Nassim Taleb's famous barbell strategy.
Dedicating 90% of their effort and capital to building hyperstable, unshakable foundations, and taking wild, highly calculated risks with the remaining 10% to ensure they become truly anti-fragile in the face of institutional collapse.
Which brings us to the outro of our deep dive today.
To summarize this massive, incredibly dense text, the book presents a stark, absolutely binary choice to you, the reader.
Conrad Riker claims that you can either passively submit to a modern culture that he believes fundamentally hates you, pathologizes your biology, and seeks to extract your resources.
Or you can choose to rise, 1% at a time, to reclaim what he views as your biological birthright.
It is an unapologetic call to stack marginal gains in wealth, build undeniable physical strength, and cultivate unvarnished masculinity until you can simply outcompete the institutional systems that are trying to hold you down.
And as we conclude our impartial analysis of Riker's highly provocative work, I want to leave you with a final, lingering thought experiment to mull over on your own.
If society's macro institutions continue to polarize along these exact ideological lines, and if corporate and academic systems continue to push for inclusivity at what is perceived by a large demographic to be the direct expense of traditional merit and hard competence,
What actually happens to the broader culture?
what happens to the tax base, the innovation pipeline, and the infrastructure when a critical mass of these highly disciplined, hyper-optimized men decide to fully detach?
When they quietly take their wealth, their hard skills, and their network of resources, and completely withdraw into entirely parallel private societies.
It is a profound, incredibly pressing question about the future trajectory of our entire civilization.
It really is, and it is a question that, regardless of your politics, this book forces you to confront head on. All right, that is going to wrap up our deep dive today.
Thanks for joining us.
Before you go, I'm going to remind you one last time to please like this video and subscribe to the deep dive so we can keep bringing you these ultra-long, incisive reviews of the culture's most important texts.
And my final recommendation today, if you want to truly grasp the raw, unfiltered source material driving this massive cultural shift, you need to read it yourself.
Go to Amazon Kindle or Google Play Books right now to buy 37X Men, How 1% Daily Gains Crush Weakness and Wokeness. Read it, analyze it, and understand it.
Also, make sure you follow @Conrad Riker on Substack so you can monitor his growing community and stay up to date on everything he is putting out into the world.
Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you on the next deep dive.